I'm Steve Speck with S&S Archery, and I got Matthew Davis from Hoyt with me on the phone today. Matt, what's your kind of role at Hoyt right now, and how did you get started in the hunting industry? I think that's a question everybody always wants to know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first off, Steve, I really appreciate you having me, dude, and I'm grateful to be here and grateful to talk with you. And so kind of my story, I was pretty fortunate and it was kind of sheer luck that I got the opportunity to start at Hoyt and be where I am. So starting from square one, I was going to college down in Provo, Utah, and I was into the whole trail running, 3D archery kind of thing. And they do that snowcast at the Bird. I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to go that one. You know which one
Oh yeah,
that is,
yeah,
right?
bow cast of the bird, yeah,
Yep.
yep.
So I was there, and it was the first year they did this thing. It was like a bow-athlon. So you'd start off and you'd run in different heats, and you'd get up there, and it was basically, dude, it sucked. So you take you take off, and you run just flat, and then it was straight up the ski lift, and you basically had to run to the top of the mountain, across the ridge, and then just break down and just come flying down the mountain. So anyways, I was at that, and I was on the warm-up range or whatever, and I'm sitting there shooting, and I was shooting a Vector Turbo at the time, and I'd custom painted it. I thought it was pretty cool, and Kevin Wilkie comes up to me and he's like, "Oh, that's a pretty sweet looking bow." I'm like, "Oh, that's Kevin Wilkie from Hoy." You know what I mean? Like everyone knows who Kevin is. He's a stud. So anyway, so I talked to him for a little bit and ended up competing and whatnot. And it was funny. I was running in one of the quarterfinal heats or whatever. And so I'm coming across the ridge and I'm kind of coming down. I mean, you have to jump over this log or whatever. They kind of have this little section of the course and you jump over a log. And so I jumped, dude, and I just absolutely yard sailed. I mean, I crash and burn and I fall and I smash the top of my cam. Like a rock hits it and it basically throws just a big sharp burr right across to the top of the string. And so I'm like, luckily I didn't have to shoot any more targets. I mean, I was, on home stretch. And so I get down there and I'm like, holy crap, like what am I going to do? And Kevin had heard that I'd fallen or whatever. And he comes up to me. He's like, hey, go find a Leatherman and I'll fix your bow. I'm like, a Leatherman, what is he going to do? So I go find one and I take my bow to him and he presses it right there, dude. And he takes off my string and he gets a file, dude, and he fixed my cam for me. And I shot that bow like that for probably another year.
Holy cow!
Yeah, so I mean, it was pretty cool. And, Kevin's a genuine guy. And so
Yeah,
while we were sitting there fixing my bow and after the race and whatnot, we got to talking a little bit. And I just told him, it'd be cool if there was ever, an opportunity to get my foot in the door at Hoyt. And he's like, yeah, give me your number. And I gave it to him, but didn't really think much of it.
hmm
What 20-year-old kid's really ever going to get a job or their dream job? And anyway, so he ended up shooting me a text. He's like, hey, there's a position in customer service. It'd be a great opportunity to get your foot in the door and get to know people here and maybe figure something out. So came down for a couple of interviews. And like I said, I was going to school full time down in Provo. And I actually ended up turning down the job because they wanted me to work full time. So I'm walking away, I'm driving home, and I'm just like, what have I freaking done? Like, this might have been my one shot at just having a really awesome job. And anyways, I was fortunate enough that, the interviews went really well, and they actually ended up calling me back a couple weeks later and said, hey, come back for another interview. We're going to try and figure stuff out. So I came back, had an awesome interview, and they ended up telling me that they would work around my schedule. And so from the first 6 months that I worked here, I was going to school and then driving all the way home and all that stuff. So it was super cool to get here. And that role fortunately developed into kind of an international sales and marketing position. And I've had the opportunity to go see some cool places throughout the world and be involved on the target side of our business a lot.
hmm
And recently, I'm sure a lot of people have heard that Kevin Wilkie had the opportunity to be closer to his family and get a different position. And he's over at Gold Tip now because it's 20 minutes from his house instead of an hour and a half commuting out here. And I was fortunate enough, I applied for the position and I've been here for a couple months now, and then I'm enjoying it so far. It's cool to get to work with some of the big names in archery, and it's amazing. They're just normal people,
Right, yeah,
but it's been really cool. So yeah,
awesome.
just here in the marketing department and working with some good people. So
Yeah,
that's kind of my background.
nice. I bet on that. Kind of doing the target archery side of it for quite a while was quite the learning experience. I can can imagine things are quite a bit different than the hunting side.
Oh, absolutely. When I started, I didn't even know what a, a target bow was. I mean, realistically, my understanding of archery was bow hunting, and I come in, they're like, oh yeah, here's the target recurves and the target compounds, and I'm like, what the heck? Like, I'd never even seen one before,
Uh-huh.
and so that there was a pretty steep learning curve with that, but it's those target guys, they're so smart and they know their bows so well that that's really opened up a lot of learning opportunities for me on bow setup and understanding, how they're supposed to shoot, how they're supposed to feel, and how they're supposed to perform. So
Mm-hmm.
combine that with working with some absolute studs here at Hoyt, you gain a lot of knowledge over the years.
Oh
So,
yeah, I can imagine. Well,
so
cool. Let's that kind of jumps right into the first topic that I want to talk about, and that
yeah,
is it's bow torque, and a lot of guys are
yeah,
probably going, man, what are you talking about there? Like over the years, I've become convinced that torque is one of the major factors in a bow that's going to cause tuning issues, and whether
hmm,
that comes from the shooter of how they're holding the bow and the grip, or if that's
yeah,
just something that's inherently designed into the bow with just bow torque. So
yeah.
let's. I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on that, and what's the main causes of torque, and then also we'll kind of get into what Hoyt does to fight that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, like you said, there's the shooter induced torque, right? And 99% of the time, that's how somebody holds a bow. I mean, I'm sure you had experience, Steve, where someone would come into your shop a number of years ago and they're like, oh, I'm getting this crazy left tear and I can't get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
You pick up the bow and shoot a bullet hole. And he's like, what the crap? And then you hand it back to him and he sits there and he keeps shooting the same tear. So it all has to do with that hand position, right? So a lot of times you'll see people, especially when they're starting out, they're giving it the death grip, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're grabbing the crap out of that bow. And so when you do that and you're at full draw, if you're moving your wrist, if you're, like you said, torquing that bow and moving it out of plane, you're not going to be consistent. You're not going to be able to have the same shot every time. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons. Along with that, with proper hand placement, it has to do with the setup of the bow, making sure that it actually fits. You
Mm-hmm.
see a lot of people that will try and squeeze into a shorter draw length, or everybody wants to have a 30-inch draw, right? They're all, oh yeah, I shoot 70 pounds, 30 inches, and but you see them anchor and their fingers back in the middle of the ear. It's like, well, what are you doing there,
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
you're not going to be consistent. So it's a lot of times, you need to go into a shop, you need to get set up properly and research it, and more than anything, I guess, find what feels natural, because like we always talk about, consistency is the most important thing in archery, and being able to repeat your shot and the bow being able to repeat itself, that's extremely important as well. So that's kind of I guess, the shooter side of things,
Mm-hmm.
as what they do. And then, kind of jumping into the topic of bows. I guess torque, it's always kind of been an inherited thing in a bow. There's so much load and so much pressure in that bow when you're at full draw,
Yes.
even when it's at rest. And each manufacturer, you can look at their design, and I guess you can kind of see how each manufacturer tries to combat that torque. Um, Roller guards, especially, that's kind of been an inherited thing since they came out, and you got to think about it, right? So those cables, they're coming off to the side. So when you're drawing your bow back, that bow's trying that's a loading point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that bow's trying to kind of give that riser's going to flex. Whether we don't really see it and we don't really feel it,
Mm-hmm.
but that bow's actually moving, and so manufacturers will design their bow and try to basically combat that, like I said. But overall, those roller guards have it's kind of been something that we've always dealt with. So being able to set up your bow properly, have a proper grip, and understand that, because if you don't understand that, you don't know how to set up your bow properly, right?
Yes, absolutely.
At the end of the day, it's gonna be inconsistent. So I guess jumping in, your question where you said what has Hoyt done to kind of fight against that torque. I'm sure everybody knows, and has probably seen our new ZT roller guard, and the ZT is zero torque. And so what happens is most roller guards, you can see they're either fixed or they're flexing in towards the riser, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's still while that helps and reduces it on the back end, it's still torquing that bow over, and those limbs want to lean and the cams want to lean because they're getting pulled that direction.
Yes.
So anybody that has heard about the ZT roller guard, I kind of invite you to watch our YouTube videos that are on that. That kind of gives you a more visual idea and understanding. I'm a super visual person, and I guess I'll try to explain it the best that I can. So basically what happens, on the backside of a roller guard, so other manufacturers, they've made like a flex guard, right? That's becoming really popular. It'll kind of bow in with those cables, and it reduces that torque and that pull that's coming off to the side of the bow. And so with the ZT roller guard, instead of flipping out inside towards the shooter,
Mm-hmm.
it's a little arm, and it's got the roller guards on the front, and it swings out to the center of the bow. And so with that arm flexing and coming out, it's bringing that torque, it's lining everything up right down the pipe. And most people, they'll look down their arrow and their sights are off to the left hand side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, with this ZT roller guard, you're basically able to line it up, straight down the pipe. And so
Wow.
that reduces the torque of the actual bow itself, and then it really comes down to the shooter. But overall, the tunability and the ease of tuning of that bow is extremely high. I mean, you can pick that bow up and you can shoot, a little bit different range as far as the spine, because you're going to have more forgiveness in that riser and the way that it's going to perform for you. So that's one of the big things that we've done. Also, like I kind of talked about, different manufacturers will design their risers in a certain way to
Mm-hmm.
reduce torque. So there's in-plane flex and there's out-of-plane flex. So the in-plane flex is, kind of forward and back. If you were doing, how do I kind of give an analogy of this? Like Florida State when they do their little thing, like, oh, you're chopping your hand. That's the in-plane flex, and then the out-of-plane is back and forth, like you were slapping someone across the face. So that's explaining what that is.
Mm-hmm.
So having a rigid riser, both in the in-plane and out-of-plane flex, that contributes a lot to the deadness in hand. A lot of guys
Mm-hmm.
talk about that. They're like, oh man, this bow's dead in my hand. Well, that's because the riser's stiff. So basically, there's that in-plane, out-of-plane flex, and if the bow's out of plane and it's tilting side to side, that's what that ZT roller guard's combating.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people recognize a Hoyt based off that bridge
Right.
that's behind the grip of the bow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what that does is it creates that rigidity in that in-plane flex.
Mm.
And so that's where you get, it's just super, the riser's really solid as you're drawing back before, and you can feel that. A lot of people are like, oh, this bow's really smooth. And that in-plane flex is kind of what's controlling that smoothness, along with the cam design and whatnot. So
Mm-hmm.
that's part of that. And along with that bridge, following that same train of thought, our grips are really thin, and we're able to do that because of that bridge. And personally, for me, as far as, we were talking about proper hand placement and how to grip the riser. Well, if you've got a smaller grip, it's a lot easier to get your hand in the right position. There's some bows out there that have a pretty hefty grip. It's like you feel like you're grabbing a baseball bat or something like that.
Right.
And that can make it difficult to get proper hand placement. So that's kind of that side of things. I mean, riser, and then talking about limbs, Hoyt uses split limb technology. And so what a split limb does is it adds torsional rigidity, right? So you kind of think about it, if you were trying to twist like a 2x4 or whatever, it's super
Mm-hmm.
rigid. That's that torsional rigidity.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a cam and a half system, which is what Hoyt uses, um, that those limbs kind of flex a little bit, but by spreading that out, it's more stable. It's kind of like, you see like a rock crawler car or something like that. They're low to the ground, and their tires are really wide.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because they're going to be really stable. And I guess that's kind of an analogy for that. But realistically, the middle, people ask us why we use a split limb and not a solid limb. Well, the middle of that limb doesn't really do anything. You're not getting any support from that. You're getting support from the outside of the actual limb.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at some manufacturers that use a single limb and a solid limb, and you look kind of towards the end where they're going to put that cam on, and it gets wider usually.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically to combat that, right? So that's what the split limb technology does for our bows.
Mm-hmm.
Um, man, I guess kind of thinking along those same lines, having a good solid pocket and the way the pocket fits on the bow, that's going to also support those limbs and support that rigidity and help the bow shoot. So
Mm-hmm.
that's that's the short and sweet. I guess those are kind of the main points of what we've done to
Mm-hmm.
combat that. I don't know if you have any additional questions on that, Steve, or what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting to hear and see kind of, to me, it's like I remember as I was, working on bows and getting more in depth into them. You just start seeing things like, the great example is knock your arrow, look down the string, and 99% of the time your pins are going to be sticking out to the left. And I used to
Yep.
just rack my brain about why in the world
Yeah.
that's going on.
Yeah.
And then, it just comes to find out that was just purely from torque. And it's
Yep.
any cable system where you're pulling all that load is transferring to the right side, to the cable guard side of the bow as you draw. The
Mm-hmm.
whole system's just going to pivot.
Yep.
And so I saw your zero torque cable, your roller guard there, and it was very intrigued by that because that should, you said I completely understand how that's going to work to counteract that twisting motion. And then yeah, so along that same design is a very, I've put bows in a press, and you
Yeah.
put the little the pins, all the way out the end of the riser, and then you're starting to compress those limbs, and I can literally watch a riser. I don't want to call out certain bows, but I've seen risers flex
Mm-hmm.
laterally, like you were talking about, almost an inch as you're pressing that bow. And
Kind
it's
of
just
scary.
like, it's scary. Yeah, it kind of blows your mind how much flex is going on in there, how much load is being transferred into those cables.
Yep.
And then, yeah, so that it just all translates out into the pocket design, like you mentioned, and then to the limbs, and then that goes into the cams, and then you got all the torque. So it's kind of interesting to see how Hoyt approaches that whole process of eliminating those variables, which basically, allowing your arrow to come when you pull that trigger, it's coming out of your bow. Basically, I like to call it perfectly perpendicular in every plane. It's
Yep.
as 360 degrees, it's coming out straight, and that's what the ultimate goal is for me, is to get that. So when that's why you shoot through paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that you're not getting a left tear, right tear, low right tear, that it's coming perfectly straight out of there. So, which that
Right.
at the end of the day equates to good bow flight or a good
Yeah.
broadhead flight. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah. Well, so it'd be very interesting to see. Third axis adjustment is the next topic that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
And it's very, very confusing, and I've done a few articles here and there about it. It's just a hard topic for guys to wrap their brain around, but it ties directly into torque. And I
Mm-hmm.
and I it blows my mind that there were some products on the market that would tell you it was like a little vise that you clamped your sight onto, and it said that you could adjust the third axis of your bow with just strapping your sight onto this vise. And it's just like, this person that developed this product didn't even understand what third axis is, because
Yep.
it's totally because of the torque of the bow. So yeah,
Exactly.
you want to go ahead and start diving into that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Like you
Yeah.
said, Steve, it's kind of a complex um, thing, but more importantly, and so it's funny. I've seen some site manufacturers call different axes different things. So
Right.
everybody's on the same page with Steve and I here. Third axis, that's like a saloon door. That kind of, if you were opening a door, that's that axis if it was pivoting on that point on your sight, right?
Yep. Yeah. The sight pin's relationship to the bar. Yeah. Exactly what you're
Exactly.
talking about. Yep.
Yep. And so most of the time, guys they'll grab a sight and they'll just screw it on. They'll kind of just eyeball it and kind of a lot of times it's funny. I've seen people that use, they're shooting a single pin or something like that, and they'll line it up with the string. Um,
Mm-hmm.
well, a lot of times, with cam spacers and stuff like that, that string might not be right down the middle to that sense. So that's kind of a funny way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess from start to finish, setting that up, it's super important to use a level and the what is it, the Hamsky level, that little guy right there that you
Mm-hmm.
can you can screw onto that. So first you need to, I mean, most of the time, what I'll do is I'll set my bow up and I'll put it in a little rack so I can hold it. So my bow, and I'll get a level and I'll put that on the side of the riser, and I'm gonna make sure that bow is perfectly straight up and down.
Mm-hmm.
And so usually what I'll do before I even do that is I'll mount my sight on there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, you look, as soon as you get that riser straight, you look at that level, and then you look at the bow, the level on your sight. And, you know, if that's, if they're not the same, obviously something's different there.
Right.
And then so going into the third axis, more importantly, that's those uphill and downhill shots. And, you know, some people might not think that's important, but, you know, Steve, I've seen the places that you hunt, and you're in the high country, man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're trying to come down on a mule deer or whatever it may be, and you may be poking over a rock, and that deer may be, you know, you'll with the range compensating rangefinder or whatever, a yardage, excuse me, compensating rangefinder, you know, that might be a 20-yard shot, but it's straight down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if that axis is off and you're not checking your level, you may think you're about to pinwheel that deer, and that arrow may go 2 feet to the left, or it might go 2 feet to the right in front of his chest. So being able to understand that and have your bow set up correctly for that, that's going to be, you know, that's going to pay dividends in the field, and that's just as important for whitetail hunters. I mean, what is it? 99% of them hunt out of a tree stand,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be shooting down, right?
Yep.
So um, basically, all you're doing is you're just verifying that is sight. The sight is perfectly perpendicular to the mount. It's got to be set up exactly in plane with that riser. So I guess that's the short and sweet, Steve, of what I have think behind it. But you know, what are some of your additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. The one thing to add there is perfectly in plane with the riser at full
Mm-hmm.
draw. That's the key.
Absolutely.
That's the key word, because the
Yep.
torque that we're talking about is gonna, it's torquing the bow. And so a great analogy I've always liked to use is that if you put a carpenter's level, just like a 3 foot level, put it in your
Mm-hmm.
hand, hold that thing so it's perpendicular to you, and get it level, and just rotate it forward or back, like pretending like it's the riser bow.
Yep.
And as long as it's perpendicular to you and your eye, and the plane of movement, that bubble's going to stay in the center. Don't change anything, but just slightly swing that saloon door, or just rotate that carpenter level to the right a little bit, and then go ahead and tilt that back, and then the bubble's going to shoot up to the high side.
Yep.
And so, yeah, when I explain that to people, I say basically you might have been shooting level, but as you aimed up, you saw your bubble shoot up to the high side, and so you're actually canting the bow,
Mm-hmm.
and then so you're thinking that you're leveling the bow, but you're actually not.
Yep.
And so, yeah, to me, third axis is just making sure that those sight pins in the picture is perfectly perpendicular to how your arrow's traveling out of the bow and your riser when you're at full draw. All right, well, we kind of got third axis covered there. Let's go back and revisit first and second axis real quick, because I think
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of a good the base for, everyone gets confused. I typically leave out talking about first axis, and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of go right to second and third, because to
Yep.
me, first axis, if the sight manufacturer did a good job of building and machining the sight, that
Mm-hmm.
should be perpendicular and plumb.
Yep.
Um, but it's definitely something that's part of it. So if you want to go through first and second a little bit.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. So everyone understands, you know, like second axis, that's rotating the sight, right?
Hmm.
And so usually a good way to do that, people talk about a walk back or a French tune, right?
Hmm.
Excuse me. So start at 20 yards or whatever, and you're going to shoot, you know, sight that in. And then as you start moving back, you're going to be able to see, you know, if your arrows are coming down a perfectly straight line, then you know that second axis is set up properly. But if it's not, and the bottom pins are kicked out to one side as you get further back, well, those arrows are going to be flying to the right because you're going to be aiming to the right.
Hmm.
So it's having, you know, especially for those guys that are shooting multi-pin sights, you know, a 5 or a 7 or whatever they may have, that's super important to have those pins right over the top of each other and perfectly in line, straight up and down. I guess that kind of makes sense. I guess that's kind of the easy way to explain it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so for me, it's going back to, you said you put your bow in a vise, you screw the sight on. I'll put a carpenter level from limb tip to limb
Mm-hmm.
tip usually, and make sure that's reading level, and then I go reference the sight, and then
Yep.
adjust the bubble from there.
Yep.
Some sights will have an actual second axis adjustment where it's rotating
Yep.
the entire sight housing, and then other sites will just have like the bubble's actually just screwed onto the bottom of the sight housing, and you can adjust it from there. But that really isn't. That's just it's
It needs
allowing you to change
fixed.
the level, but it's not actually fixing it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're going
It's
to compensate for it, but it's a band-aid, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
not real
exactly.
fix.
And then so yeah, that translates um, into what we said if you're doing walk back tuning, and you're going to be shooting right or left of that line if your second axis is off.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's jump on. Lastly, I think it'd be a very helpful, just a lot of good information for the listeners out there right now. That I want you to basically pretend that you're, the average Joe guy, and you walked into your local archery shop, and you picked a brand new Hoyt off the rack.
Yeah.
Um, what are just kind of run top to bottom of? I'm sure you kind of have this checklist of items from setting up the draw length to, probably the first thing you're going to do, I'd imagine, is get the cams in time, get the draw length set, get the poundage set right.
Yep.
Yeah, so just kind of walk us through picking a bow off the rack to having, we've kind of covered some of these topics, but having a
Hmm.
bow shooting broadheads well.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're going right out of the box or whatever, you pull the bow out. I'm going to look that bow over from top to bottom. I'm going to make sure the strings are in good condition. There's no damage to, if there was any transport damage when it was going to the dealer. That's super important to do because nothing's more frustrating than having something that's wrong with it and you're trying to set it up with the dealer and it's not working. So make sure you just give it a thorough inspection. You just give it the old eyeball
Mm-hmm.
and you check it from top to bottom. And then usually what I'll do is I'll make sure that I set it up to the proper draw length. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I guess the preferred method that I've seen that's usually the most effective is to have someone put their fist on the wall and under their thumb put have a measuring tape.
Mm-hmm.
And you're basically going to draw that like you're drawing a bow, and you're going to put that measuring tape, just the corner of it, basically in what your anchor point is going to be. And you want to make sure you have a little bit of bend in your arm. You don't want to be overextended. And then have someone look at it and see where that's touching kind of the corner of your mouth. And usually that's pretty spot on. So that's kind of a really quick way to do that and really
Mm-hmm.
effective way. So that's what I've done. So make sure you have it set up to the correct draw length. That's probably the most important thing. And then, like you said, going in and making sure that the cams are timed. You need to make sure whether it's a draw stop peg or whatever it may be on the bottom is synchronized with the top cam. And what that means is when you shoot, those cams are going to fire at the exact same time, and that's going to help a lot with the paper tune and how that arrow is going to actually fly. So set a proper draw length. You're going to time the cams. I guess off the top of my head. Oh, also, on Hoyts, a lot of people are afraid of cam lean,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of going back to that torque topic we've kind of covered for a little bit, you know, cam lean isn't a bad thing, and there's so much information out there, and you know, I think archery talk's the devil, man. I mean, there's a lot of smart guys out there
Yeah.
that are very credible, but it's funny, a lot of people, there's everybody with the bow thinks they're a professional, and there's more than one way to skin a cat, and I understand that. But
Mm-hmm.
cam lean, especially in a Hoyt, is a good thing, and what that is doing is that's basically kind of aiming that cam towards that roller guard,
Mm.
and that kind of helps with the flex of the limbs and the torque, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not going to be excessive or anything like that, but people need to understand. They think, oh, my bow's going to derail if I tilt that cam over. Well, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
A bow's a machine, and it's going to shoot the exact same every time if you're doing the exact same thing every time. So
Mm-hmm.
after you synchronize the cams and you're paper tuning the bow, we call it yoke tuning, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what that's doing is that's kind of affecting that top lean of the cam. And so a split yoke, it's connected on one side of the limb on one side and obviously one side on the other. And so what you can do is you'd have to press the bow to do that. But if you were shooting the bow and you had, your center shot was your 13/16, that's kind of the recommended starting point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'll just kind of eyeball it usually. I'll look down my arrow, eyeball that, and then I'll measure that, and usually it's within that. and then from there I'm going to shoot it through paper. And if I'm getting a left tear, well, kind of the way to compensate for that, that's obviously a weak tear, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can move your sight in a little bit, and then you can tilt your cam. And what you're going to do is when you yoke tune, is you're going to lean your cam to the side of the tear. And so what that's going to do, it's going to help the string travel in the right direction to help compensate for that. Half of the time, I mean, a guy will get a bow and he'll want that cam straight up and down, and he's going to shoot just a funny tear. Well, if you yoke tune that bow, Steve, I mean, all you're going to do is you might add 2 twists to the left side, and you need to make sure that you take that same amount of twists out of the right side because you need to keep your bow in the right axle to axle length.
Mm-hmm.
And just doing that'll get rid of that tear half of the time. And another important thing, is making sure you're shooting the proper arrow spine. There's this idea that, every bow needs to be shooting super, super fast, and there's some speed freaks out there, but,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how fast you miss them. You need to have the properly spined arrow.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Can you give a rough recommendation there on 60 pounds, 65 pounds, 70 pounds, and coordinating draw lengths with that?
yeah, so, I mean, I usually, I mean, working at Hoyt, I shoot Easton arrows, and I think they're incredible arrows. I shoot the FMJ,
Mm-hmm.
super forgiving. It's got, it's a mixture of aluminum, which is probably the most consistent thing out there. You see target shooters, and what do they shoot? Aluminum arrows,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, at shorter draw lengths, I guess I don't want to make any recommendations and then have someone tell me I'm wrong, but
All right. No, I got you.
I would usually go, and I would just go online, and you can look at most companies, what their arrow stiffness recommendations are, whether that's Easton, Carbon Express, Black Eagle, whatever that may be, Gold Tip, kind of look at that. But usually, it's if you're ever on the teetering point where you're trying to decide between whether it's a 400 and a 340 or a 340 and a 300 spined arrow, usually I'll go with that stiffer spined arrow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of my preference. I like to shoot a heavy arrow. It makes the bow a lot quieter. Um, you get more kinetic energy out of that, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's kind of my personal preference on that. So,
Okay. Yeah, I definitely would agree there with running. If you're ever on the border, run stiff.
yep,
There's going to be few exceptions where a weaker spine, but to me that just means there's probably something else going on
yeah,
inside the bow that you need to take a look at, and whether that be cam lean and yoke tuning or something like that.
yeah.
So when you're paper tuning and you're talking about yoke tuning, you're not
hmm
messing with the rest left and right. You're leaving that center shot at 13/16.
That's where I'll start, and it kind of depends on how big my tear is. If I'm just getting barely a left tear, I want to leave that rest in the middle, and so I'll yoke tune off of that. If I'm getting a pretty dramatic tear, one, you're probably got too weak of an arrow,
Mm-hmm.
but like I said, I'll move my rest in a little bit to help stiffen that up, and so I like to leave my rest in the middle, basically the best that I can. Um, it depends on what fletching you're shooting or whatever, but that kind of creates that forgiveness whether you're shooting a high profile vein or a blazer or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that may be. It kind of opens up a wider range of preferences, whatever you're doing with your arrow. But like you said, you can absolutely move your rest to do that. And so if you've got weak
Gotcha.
tear, move it right. Stiff
So
tear, move it left.
so moving your rest is kind of a macro adjustment, and then yoke
Mm-hmm.
tuning is kind of your micro. So if you're just
Yep.
getting a really small tear, then you're just going straight to the yoke tuning.
Yep. Yep.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So.
Okay.
Yep.
Um,
Have you ever set up a Hoyt? I mean,
yeah,
in your
yeah.
line of work.
Hoyt Magnatech was my first bow. I started
Oh,
bow
really?
hunting in '02. Yeah, 2002. That was the
Heck
first year I
yeah.
picked up a bow, and um, yeah, just my friend of mine had an older Hoyt, like mid '90s, something like that. Went
Yeah.
and shot it uh, for the first time, and literally like the next day went and bought that Hoyt Magnatech. So it was, and
That's
then
pretty
it's been
awesome,
been
man.
downhill or uphill, however you want to say it, since then.
It's all uphill, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
So,
awesome. Those
yeah,
they've come a long way since then, dude. It's
yeah.
amazing on a year-to-year basis the technological improvements that the manufacturers are able to make. So
hmm
pretty cool to see
Yeah,
every year.
it's pretty. pretty interesting to see just bow evolution. I mean, just go back
Yeah,
to a 2008-9 Hoyt to now, and yeah, the technology that's in them is pretty impressive.
100%, man.
So
It's insane.
okay, well, let's keep on rolling with this. So you got your bow, you got your rest on, you're set up, you're getting a good paper tune. What's next?
Um, you know, and kind of I guess talking about that torque, it's making sure you're anchoring correctly. I guess I apologize. I'm jumping around a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times people you need to make sure you're using good D-loop material and that your anchor point's consistent. I mean, I'm pretty sure we've all seen people that they bury that string in their face,
Mm-hmm.
and those fletchings are pushed up against their chin or their facial hair or whatever it may be, and you're never going to be able to get a consistent tear with that. You're really not, and that might be that's probably the number one issue is facial contact. So that's something to keep in mind when you are paper tuning,
Yeah.
that you've got a good anchor point. And usually what I do on that is I'm just bringing that string right across the corner of my mouth, and I'm just barely touching my nose on that, because you want to have good head position, right? You don't want to be tilting your head down. You don't want to be leaning all the way back. So um, that's super important. Making sure just good solid form.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about having a good strong bow arm, but keep pulling through your bow. A lot of guys, there's a lot of bows out there that have really great let off. You pull that bow back, and it's like you have to push it to get it to go down unless you're going to shoot it.
Mm-hmm.
And so another important thing, keep pulling on that. Pull through your release. Make sure you're doing a good release. Whether that's a thumb release or a trigger release, that's important to factor in. Um, and then I guess on that same topic is keep pulling through that. Talking about D-loop material, um, a lot of guys most bow shops they'll just kind of have that camo colored
Mm-hmm.
stuff. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And that stuff's not bad, but it's good to have kind of a pliable and kind of loose, but obviously strong material, because when you hook your release onto the D loop, you might pinch the arrow, you might be pinching that knock, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to get you a bad tear. But usually when most people shoot, especially people that are shooting a thumb release, you have to twist your hand. And so if that D loop is really, really stiff, it's going to be twisting that string, and it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be moving the knock of that arrow.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a really important thing I look at when doing that and doing that paper tune. And then after paper tuning, kind of like we talked about when we were doing the axis setups, I'll do a walk back tune and just make sure that everything's right down the pipe, that those arrows are, as I'm getting further back, they're still
Mm-hmm.
impacting at the exact same point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's kind of to the extent that I do that, and it's good to shoot good long ranges. I mean, a lot of times guys just want to shoot at 20 yards because they're very confident in that. They're comfortable doing that, but it's good to make sure that you're grouping well at long distances, even if that might not be, a shot that you're going to take in a realistic hunting situation. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I guess that's kind of my 2 cents on that. I guess I don't know what else to really say about as far
Yeah.
as setting that up. But I mean, that's the short and sweet. Making sure you're setting up your rest right, um, and then going into cam timing. You may need to, and then paper tune, walk back tune, and then from there. And I guess you kind of talked about broadheads. It's funny, even before, so everybody knows, before we kind of started recording, Steve and I were talking about broadheads and whatnot, and it's funny, a lot of guys they'll throw a broadhead on there, and they never spin their arrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just screw that broadhead on there, and they're thinking that broadhead is perfectly flush. So Steve, what experiences have you had with that? I mean, with your friends and stuff. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that guy. Field points fly awesome. He throws a broadhead on there, and good night. He can't hit the outside of the
Yeah.
ball.
Yeah, definitely having starts with the tip of your arrow insert, being square, and then a broadhead that's going to spin true. So as you screw it in, and there's different factors. Sometimes a broadhead's just machined and made, so it's not there's not a vertical line that goes right through the threads all the way out to the tip of the broadhead, so it's just going to wobble regardless. Um,
Yeah.
and I just basically throw that in the junk pile. So
Yeah.
the way I like to describe a broadhead is basically it doesn't matter, just about any broadhead is going to shoot out of a perfectly tuned bow, arrow, shooter setup. Um,
Yeah.
and so I like to describe it as a visual of tell guys, look, you just put airplane wings on the front of your arrow.
Yeah.
And as you shoot that, if those wings are perfectly, and it goes back to that like 360-degree perpendicular out of your bow, they're going to grab the air and start steering the arrow, left, right, up, down, whatever.
Yep.
Um, and so along the lines of that is making sure those wings are perfectly, you know, square to the arrow is the easiest way to check that is just screw it in and find a good solid table surface and spin the arrow. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking for a wobble, or, right where the arrow connects to the insert.
Yep.
And if you're getting a good spin, then that broadhead should be good to go. So
Yep. I agree, and it's
yeah.
funny, I mean, I'm one of those guys. Maybe I'm cheap or whatever, but I'll just open a drawer in my kitchen, and I'll just roll the arrow across the top of that, and
Uh
nothing's
huh.
hitting. You don't need to have an arrow spinner to
Mhm.
roll that or whatever. So,
Mhm.
like you said, a table or whatever that may be. But I watch just the very tip of that arrow, and I don't want it to move.
Right. Right.
So,
Right. Absolutely.
so what's your preference on broadheads then? I mean, obviously, you designed the solid broadheads. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. So
for shooting.
I designed the solid just as a seeing a need for just a really simple, good, strong fixed blade broadhead, one that flew well and penetrated well. That was kind of number one on the list. Or those are the first two things, flight and penetration. Without those, you're not going to kill an animal. So, um, yeah,
And that's why you
there's
went with the two blade, right? I mean, most people, they're shooting a fixed blade or whatever. It's a lot of times it's a three blade. I know there's bleeders on that broadhead you shoot, but
right.
it's basically a two blade
Yeah,
broadhead,
it's a
right?
two blade with little bleeders up front. Yeah, it's all about reducing surface area. So those a three blade is going to have a lot more, a larger wing, basically in front of the arrow for that to grab air. So reducing the
Yep.
surface area as much as possible, and that's why mechanicals, traditionally head to head against a fixed blade are going to fly better. They have a smaller surface area. They look more
Yeah.
like a field point where the air is just sliding over the top of it. So designing the solid was all about reducing and streamlining as much air surface as possible so that it's not affecting the flight as bad. So
Spot on, man. And those things are scary sharp.
yeah, yeah.
I've never received a broadhead that sharp. I got those 175s, dude. Those
Hmm.
things just stupid scary. They're a good
Yeah.
head, man. You
Uh,
did good.
Thanks. Yeah. So Matt, just run us through, what you're setting up right now. What's your arrow? What's your sight? What's your rest? It's good to know what everybody's got.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, um, most people know I'm a super big trad guy. I shoot a compound every once in a blue moon, but I'm all about that trad life. But anyway, so I mean, going back to compounds, like I said earlier, I'm all about a heavy arrow. Shooting a 300 spined FMJ, and I'm one of those guys. I would like to be able to shoot a bow well, than just be able to shoot it a couple times and do okay, but get fatigued later on. So Hoyt offers a 65-pound max draw weight on our bows. So I've got a 30-inch draw. I shoot one of the little Carter thumb releases on that,
Hmm.
and um, shooting a Hoyt Ultra Rest. We worked with those guys, and we've got a cool little patent that basically when you mount that rest on, it's going to align perfectly flush to a Hoyt riser. So that kind of helps in that.
Mm-hmm.
As far as sights, I use a Hoyt sight. There's a lot of really good sights out there. I might get in trouble for recommending some of them, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of Spot Hog sights.
Uh-huh.
I just think those things are absolutely indestructible. And through experience, I've gone back to fixed pins. I I shot a slider for a while. I was really excited about that, and because it's so nice. You draw back and you got one thing to focus on.
Right.
But in a hunting situation, especially here out west, I got my butt handed to me a couple of times. You're stalking in on a deer, or you're trying to get above them, or whatever it may be, and you've got your sight dialed to 60 because that's where you think that deer's going to be. And I had an experience here on Utah's late extended archery hunt, creeping around on a couple of deer, and crawled through the snow and got above them. And I think I'm going to come around this edge, and they're going to just still be in that bottom. So I've got my sight set at 70 yards, and I'm coming around that corner, and those deer are right there at like 30 yards, and they stand there and look at me, and I couldn't do anything about it. Like I wasn't going to shoot. I'm sure some people might do that in that situation, just aim low, but I like to know exactly where I'm going to hit. So that was a good learning experience for me. And going back to that, I've gone back to fixed pins. 3-pin sliders, I think those are a good choice. Getting a floating pin, having those set and fixed up. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, the 50 a foot low trick on so, whether it's a single pin or multi-pin sights, basically if you were to shoot, if you were to set up a dot on the bottom, if you were to set up a dot in a range or whatever, you start at 20 yards and you shoot at that dot. And as you walk back, you'll notice that even though you're aiming with a different pin, those arrows are going to group within a certain distance. So if you ever get in a situation, especially on an elk, I mean, you're shooting at a backboard worth of vitals right there. So, you can put that 50 pin. If you don't know if he's at 30 or if he's at 40 or whatever that may be, you can basically put that 50 pin right on his heart, and you're going to hit within, a pie plate area. That those arrows are still going to group, and that has to do with the trajectory of the arrow and that aiming point. So I know there's a lot of, I think there's an article out there by somebody that kind of went into more depth on that. But getting back to, what I shoot, I really like a high FOC. I shoot those 75 grain brass inserts in there. And, I think that helps a lot in arrow flight downrange. I saw this cool little example of this guy that was, I think it was on YouTube. He got he got straws. I don't know if you've seen this, Steve, but he got a bunch of like straws that you drink out of, and he would put a little weight in different positions of that straw. He'd put one at the very top, one about an inch down, and one like right in the middle, and then he would just get a rubber band. He was just like shooting it off his hand. But that arrow that had that weight right at the tip of the arrow, of the straw, excuse me, it went super far and it went super straight. But the other ones, they would kind of kick off to the side. So high FOC, that really has to do a lot with penetration. It has to do with the momentum, and it creates a really consistent arrow. So like I said, a heavy arrow with high FOC, then throw a solid broadhead on there and you're good to go.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah, man. So
Awesome. Well, man, I think that kind of covers everything. We got talking about bow torque and rolled into third axis, and then really just kind of what you're looking for when you pick a bow up off the shelf. So
yeah.
I appreciate the time. What's a good way to just hoytarchery.com or hoyt.com?
Yeah, it's just Hoyt.com. Yeah, you go ahead and get on there. You can look at all of our bows. Check out the Hoyt YouTube channel as well. There's a video about every single bow on there. So if you're interested to look into them, you can go online. We have a dealer locator. You can punch in your zip code. It'll tell you all the dealers within a certain distance. I invite anybody listening to go down and try shooting a Hoyt and, to get serious about it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I appreciate you coming on today, Matt, and it was good talking with you.
My pleasure, Steve, and I really appreciate the time, and I hope everybody knows listening. Steve's an absolute stud. He's a great guy and a great guy to have in the industry. So thanks again, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. You have a good one, man.
Hey, take care.